I backed this watch, expecting to make this video a cautionary tale, a Kickstarter chronograph, a brand I'd never heard of before, a mechanical movement from China. This was supposed to be one of those videos where I say, look, this is why you don't back Kickstarter watches. Delays, compromises, a watch that maybe looks a little bit better in renders than it does on the wrist, and that's the problem. Because once it arrived, it didn't give me that story. Instead, it forced me to ask a much more uncomfortable question. What if some of our assumptions about watchmaking value are simply wrong? This is the Boderry Landmaster Chronograph, and it surprised me more than I expected. This was the first time I'd ever heard of Boderry. Honestly, when I first saw the name, I assumed it was some small British microbrand. It sounded like it belonged on some kind of pilot's chronograph, heritage adjacent, maybe even a little bit romantic. But once I backed the project and actually did my homework, that illusion disappeared very, very quickly. Boderry is a young Chinese brand founded in the early 2020s with operations tied to Guangzhou and Hong Kong. And look, credit where it's due, they're relatively upfront about this. There's no invented alpine backstory, no faux vintage narrative. Their proposition is far more direct. Modern movements, mechanical movements, and aggressive pricing. Within watch communities, that puts them in a very specific and often polarizing position. Some praise Boderry for delivering titanium cases, sapphire crystals, and automatic movements at prices that feel almost suspiciously low. Others point to inconsistent communication, Kickstarter delays, and even uneven customer service. So expectations were mixed, which frankly made this the perfect watch to evaluate purely on its own merits. No nostalgia, no brand loyalty, and no excuses. Now, this Kickstarter didn't just launch, it absolutely exploded. The Boderry Landmaster campaign raised over 34 times its funding goal, drawing support from hundreds of backers, eager for a titanium, tritium-lit mechanical GMT and chronograph in one package. But the optimism of the funding success didn't translate into a smooth fulfillment experience. Originally, backers were told to expect delivery around September, just a couple of months after the campaign closed. Instead, shipments slipped back repeatedly. Backer discussions point to a range of production headaches, including issues with sourcing and installing tritium tubes, and the sheer volume of orders the brand hadn't quite anticipated. Reddit communication didn't exactly help. Updates from Boderry's founder Gary Ho became sparse and infrequent as delays mounted. While he had personally fronted promotional content for the launch, many backers later reported long periods of no clear information on timing or tracking. To Boderry's credit, at the time of writing, most watches have reached customers, albeit in a fairly haphazard manner. My own showed up on my doorstep delivered by a third-party logistics provider with no tracking details, no heads up, nothing. Just like a phantom appearing and then vanishing. And that paints a pretty clear picture for backers of crowd-funded projects. It's a bit of a cautionary tale for anyone tempted by spec-heavy Kickstarter tech. Because the reality of delivery, quality control, and communication is perhaps just as important as what's promised on the campaign page. Let's talk about the numbers, because this is where theory and reality really start to diverge. On paper, the Landmaster Chronograph measures 39mm in diameter, excluding the crown and pushers. A lug-to-lug comes in at 48mm, total thickness at 15.7mm, including a 2mm domed sapphire crystal, and a lug width at a very sensible 20mm. Now, 39mm sounds pretty compact and almost conservative, for a chronograph at least. But proportions matter more than just raw diameter. Those lugs are elongated, and while there's no dramatic overhang on my smaller wrist, it's right on the edge. The watch wears larger than the number suggests, and the thickness is very much present. Part of that thickness comes from the exhibition caseback, which adds roughly 1.5 mm to the overall height. From a purely functional tool watch perspective, I think a sealed caseback would have made more sense. It would have reduced bulk and reinforced the utilitarian design language. But I also kind of appreciate and understand the decision. Boderry clearly wants to show off what's inside, and at this price point, an automatic chronograph is something they're pretty proud of. I don't begrudge the choice even if it comes at the cost of wearability for smaller wrists. Interestingly, those elongated lugs also help prevent the watch from looking overly bulbous, given its compact diameter to height ratio, a common aesthetic challenges with many Flieger-style automatic chronographs. That said, the Landmaster is undeniably chunky on your wrist and will absolutely fight your shirt cuffs, unfortunately. A quick ask from me before we continue. If you found this video useful or valuable, do consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. It lets me know that I'm creating content that's entertaining and or useful for you, and helps me to guide my work and future reviews as well. Thank you very much, and now back to the video. Both the case and the bracelet are manufactured from grade 2 titanium, finished in a utilitarian rather than decorative manner. The dark, bead-blasted surface should, at least in theory, hide wear well and reinforce the tool watch aesthetic. We'll come back to durability later on though. There are no polished chamfers or fancy transitions here, and that's perfectly fine. This watch knows exactly what it is. Crucially, full titanium construction helps to mitigate the visual and physical bulk, thanks to its lower density compared to 316L stainless steel. Sized for my roughly 6.2-inch wrist, the watch weighs in at just 102 grams. To put that into perspective, many non-chronograph automatic steel watches easily push 140 to 150 grams. That weight saving isn't just subtle, it fundamentally changes how the watches weigh. The Boderry signed oversized onion crown is generally practical, easy to grip, visually appropriate, and entirely keeping in with the vintage pilot chronograph theme. The chronograph pushers have a firm, positive action, neither mushy nor stiff, just mechanically competent. The pusher starts and stops the timer, while the bottom snaps the red-taped central second hand back to zero like a saluting soldier. The H-length bracelet integrates into the case via drilled lugs. Certainly not my favorite solution, particularly if you enjoy the frequent strap change idea. That said, the decision is entirely consistent with the watch's military and field watch inspiration. Bracelet articulation is excellent. The center links are subtly beveled for visual interest, and the bracelet tapers slightly from 20mm at the lugs to 18mm at the clasp, feeding into a simple dual button system. There is no on-the-fly adjustment, but resizing is easy thanks to screw pins, and on the wrist it's comfortable and secure. At this price point, that's more than serviceable. I chose the reverse panda dial, and this is where the watch really finds its personality. The Landmaster Chronograph uses a classic Flieger-style tri-compax layout, a 30-minute elapsed counter at 12, running seconds at 9, a 12-hour totalizer at 6, and a cutout day-date display at 3. Each sub-register features a subtle silver shimmer with a circular grain texture, black painted indices, and a long arrow-style hands sweeping its way around. The main dial is rendered in a textured asphalt black finish, serving as the backdrop for the rest of the furniture. A printed white minute track frames the dial, while one of the watch's headline features, Tritium tube indices, appears at each 5-minute marker, excluding the cardinal points. Applied Arabic numerals sit above these tubes, adding depth and visual hierarchy. White syringe-style hour and minute hands, also containing tritium tubes, handle timekeeping duties, while the central chronograph seconds hand thankfully resets to a precise 12 o'clock position. I will point out at this point that the hands do look rather thin and a little bit flimsy, so I think the jury is out as to whether or not this will be a resilient dial furniture. Combined with the dome sapphire crystal, the overall effect is unmistakably vintage. There's strong pilot chronograph energy here. Not a direct copy, but very much speaking the same design language as watches like the Sinn 356 SA or even the shadow of an IWC Spitfire. Purposeful, legible, slightly utilitarian. The crystal adds warmth and a gentle distortion at certain angles, enhancing the vintage feel without compromising on clarity. It's a subtle design choice, but one that quietly elevates the watch beyond what the price would suggest. Legibility has also been excellent. Every element complements the next with just the right amount of contrast. At no point during day or night did I struggle to tell the time at all. Now, one of the headline features, which we've mentioned earlier, is the real tritium tube illumination. Kickstarter press images were impressive, and Boderry certainly topped up the quality and brightness of the Tritium. The reality, however, was a little more restrained. In complete darkness, the glow is consistent and clearly readable. It doesn't need charging, doesn't fade overnight, and it's always there, doing exactly what Tritium is designed to do. That said, expectations need to be realistic. This is not ball-level Tritium, nor is it the same plane as Marathon's class-leading field watches. In daylight or low ambient light, the Tritium presence is subtle rather than striking, more applied white indices than the glowing blue beacons in the press material. But in deep darkness, it works, and at this price, that's still pretty impressive. The campaign made much of the fact that this watch used an automatic chronograph movement from Chinese manufacturer Peacock, but it never specified which one. After some research, it became clear that this was most likely the Peacock SL4609. This movement is best understood as a modern derivative of the legendary ETA 7750, with differences in layout, thickness, and jewel count. It's a tri-compact movement with a 12:6:9 layout, day-date complication at 3, beginning at 28,800 vibrations per hour with a 45-hour power reserve. Regulation, though, was kind of subpar. Tested on a time grapher across 3 positions, it averaged about plus 13 to 15 seconds per day, with a beat error of roughly 1 millisecond. That said, at this price point, it's well within acceptable tolerance. If manufacturers are going to cut corners anywhere, regulation is where it usually happens, especially with chronograph movements, which introduce additional complexity, friction, and variability. Here's the crucial point though. Any watchmaker familiar with a 7750 would feel largely at home at servicing this movement. The Peacock has been in production since 2024, with replacement movements reportedly retailing between 80 to 120 USD, and complete watches using this caliber typically landing between 4 to 500 US dollars. Which brings us then to the elephant in the room. I paid 329 US dollars for this. At that price, this watch becomes almost impossible to contextualize. Where else can you find a titanium-constructed, sapphire crystal-equipped automatic chronograph, let alone one of tritium illumination at that price? This doesn't feel like a sustainable long-term price. It feels like a Kickstarter anomaly. And if Boderry ever brings this to the market at its stated $429, it suddenly makes a little bit more sense. But even then, the question remains, if this can exist and function competently, what exactly are we paying for elsewhere? Now, even at this price, this video wouldn't be complete without a fuller critique, so let's do just that. Let's start with the bead blasted finish on the case and bracelet. If you've owned recent Citizen titanium watches with its Duratite coating, you'll know how structures tend to reveal a lighter undertone. With the Landmaster, anywhere becomes far more obvious. After only limited use, there are already visible areas on the bracelet and clasp where the coating appears to have flaked away. Not ideal if you're detail-oriented. The exhibition caseback also warrants further criticism. The movement decoration is frankly unattractive. The customized Boderry rotor, bridges, and gear train all feature a sanitized, pelage-like finish that looks cheap and somewhat toy-like. A sterile caseback with a minimalist engraving would have been far more preferable. Coming from the very affordable yet visually pleasing ST19 manual chronographs, this was a real disappointment. Finally, there's water resistance. Boderry claims 100 meters, which I find optimistic. As enthusiasts know, water resistance depends on gasket quality, case construction, and crown and pusher design. Chronographs are inherently more difficult to seal, and far more established brands like Sinn invest heavily to achieve similar ratings. I thread very carefully here about taking a swim with this. The Boderry Landmaster Chronograph isn't perfect. It's thick. It wears larger than its diameter suggests. The brand has a mixed reputation, and Kickstarter is always a bit of a minefield. But once it's on your wrist, it does something unexpected. It challenges assumptions. I backed this expecting disappointment, and instead, I ended up with a watch that made me rethink value, expectations, and what really matters when we talk about mechanical watches. And that honestly makes it one of the more interesting watches I've worn this year. If you've ever backed a Kickstarter watch, whether it turned out brilliantly or went completely sideways, I'd love to hear your experience. Tell us which one it was and whether you do it again down in the comments. And until next time, keep your watches well so you are right in time. Be well, and I'll see you soon.